I want to talk tonight, and I have been gearing up to do this. The last few weeks, we've not been in a series, right? And the reason we haven't been in a series is because I knew Bible school was coming, and I knew that we were going to be out of town at the end of July. So what I have done is I have just kept track of all my single lessons that I want to get in from time to time and strategically teach you. And so we have just been doing some standalone stuff. We have talked about sharing your faith in recent weeks, and how do you witness to somebody that doesn't know the Lord. We give you scriptures, and we gave you kind of talking points to walk through to share your faith. And so we become acclimated with that. Of course, last week we had Bible school. We didn't have a Wednesday night service. Tonight, I am going to address a single topic. That'll be just a one-time standalone topic. But this is a often misunderstood topic that is talked about. And I want you to know where our church stands on it. I want you to know where I stand on it. And I want you to know why we do what we do on this subject, okay? And this is an exciting subject. And as soon as I say what we're going to talk about, some of you are going to roll your eyes. You ready? All right. Here's the question that I want to ask you tonight, okay? Are we supposed to tithe? There they go. All right, there we go. I'm teasing. Are we supposed to tithe? Well, some of you guys are like, yeah, we're supposed to tithe. Why? How do you know that? Just like we go with everything else. How do you know that you're supposed to do that? And why do you know that you're supposed to do that? Does it matter? There's a couple things that get often said about this subject. So, and by the way, let me say this. This is a subject I don't talk about a lot. I don't talk about it a lot because God provides for this church. He always has. But it's not a topic that I'm ashamed to talk about. A lot of times, preachers get a bad rap because a lot of people say, well, they talk about it all the time. If you hang around Catalyst very much, we don't talk about this very much. I probably haven't talked about this in 2 to 3 years, okay? God takes care of us. It's not, and I know what you're thinking. Some preachers talk about it all the time, okay, because they need to. They feel like if I don't talk about this, then people aren't going to do this, and they need. Some preachers preach it out of necessity. I am very blessed to preach it from a point where God has provided for this church. He continues to provide for 10 years. This October, he has. I'm not preaching out of necessity, like, oh my goodness, we got to get our tithing up. That's not why I'm preaching this. I'm preaching this because when preaching, as my old preacher said, is like administering medicine. A teaspoon at a time, a teaspoon at a time, a teaspoon at a time. I don't give you the whole bottle at once, but I give you the teaspoon. And when that teaspoon comes up, I give it to you. Okay? So I felt for a couple of weeks now, we're going to talk about this. Before I leave next week, I won't be here next Wednesday night, I want to discuss this topic. Here's what often gets said, and it's right. Tithing isn't mentioned a whole lot in the New Testament. You're right. That's the argument against it. Okay? Tithing isn't mentioned a whole lot in the New Testament. In fact, it's mentioned by Jesus a couple times. He uses the word tithe. And then when you get to the letters of Paul and after Jesus' resurrection, you know what you hear about tithing? Not a lot. Not a lot. So a lot of people say, well, does that mean we're not supposed to do it anymore? After, is it kind of like the law? Is it kind of like, well, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus happened, so we're not under that Old Testament rule anymore? Is that true, or is that accurate? We're going to look at that tonight. Secondly, here's what you hear about tithing. Tithing is law. Okay? How many have ever heard that? Tithing is law, and we're not under law. Okay? When somebody says something is law, what are they referring to? Anybody? Moses. Everybody agree with that? The law of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are written by Moses, and in there, especially like books like Leviticus, we have a lot of law, right? Okay, Exodus, Leviticus, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. What is that? It's a law, okay? Now, Jesus said, when he came, he said, I am come, what did he say? Am I come to do away with the law? No, it's not what he said. He said, I'm come to fulfill it, okay? So a lot of the Old Testament, the ordinances, the dietary demands, things like that, okay? The handwriting of ordinances and things like that is what Paul referred to, has been blotted out. But does that mean that all of the law is gone? And is tithing the law? Is that the law? And are we supposed to do it today? I want to look at that. Now I want to show you, I want to write 4 or 5 words on the board, and I want to show you words used, and this is probably not an all-encompassing list, for finances and what we would talk about that would fit in our lesson tonight. The word tithe, okay? Obviously the plural of that is tithes, okay? There's words like offering, okay? There's words like first fruit, okay? There are words that carry some of the connotation, increase. A lot of times when you do a study on these, you will see these words. And let me show you, there's a word that's sometimes used in the Old Testament. Firstling. Of course, that's an old King James word, but I don't know how the modern translations translate that. I want to try to scoot this out. Can everybody see this? Okay. Tithe, tithes, offering, first fruits, increase, firstling. What's a tithe? What's an offering? What's the difference? Who cares? I want to answer that. You know why I want to teach on this tonight? Because every Sunday morning, there's a plate that goes by you. And I say, or somebody says, we're going to pray and we're going to thank God for the tithes and the offering. What does that mean? How do you know what the tithe is? What is an offering? And is that something that you're supposed to do? Do I have a right to expect the people of Catalyst Church to tithe? Is that even a concept that's for us today? Am I supposed to do that as a pastor? Okay? Or some pastors say no. Some pastors say the people are supposed to tithe, but the pastor's not. I've heard that. Usually companies, they'll say, well, I expect you to tithe, but not me, because the Levites in the Old Testament were the priests, and they dipped into the pot and partook of the stuff that everybody brought in, but they didn't have to give it. They didn't have an inheritance. They'll go through that, all that stuff. Well, I'm not a priest in that sense, and I'm not a Levite. So is it right for me and you to do that? I want to answer that. Now, I don't want to ask anybody here to do something and I'll explain why. That makes sense? Is that fair enough? So, is tithing in the Bible? First of all, let me give you the short answer. Yes. Used throughout all the Bible. The word tithe and the word tithes and offering and first fruit and increase and firstling, all these words are used in there, and there was a system of tithing in the Old Testament. Nobody denies that, okay? Tithing, where they gave a tenth of what they made. Now, I want to address one of the first things right off the bat, because the number one criticism of tithing, and you shouldn't preach tithing today, is this: tithing is law and we're not under law. It's the number one argument, okay? We're under the new covenant of Jesus' blood, the death, burial, and resurrection, erased all that. We don't have to observe those Old Testament laws, okay? That is the biggest argument against tithing, okay? Now, here's what I want to do, though. I want to take you to some instances in Scripture that use these words and talk about somebody giving a tithe or tithes or an offering or the first fruits or an increase or of the firstlings of their increase. I want you to go early on to Genesis chapter number 4. Genesis chapter number 4, and I want to show you a story that a lot of people debate about, and I believe there's a couple connotations to it. But I want to show you, it is the story of Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel. How many remember the story of Cain and Abel? We know that Abel was killed by his brother Cain. We know that God had respect to the offering that Cain brought and didn't, to Abel, that Abel brought and not to Cain. And so there was some jealousy there, and brother slew brother, and it was the first murder. Actually, if you study biblically, it wasn't the first murder. Jesus calls the devil in John chapter 8 a murderer from the beginning. He murdered Adam and Eve. In that sense, that was the first murder. It was a spiritual murder. The first physical murder, we believe, was the first one mentioned, is Cain and Abel. So I want you to look at this verse. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Verse 2. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So Cain was a farmer, and Abel was a shepherd. He had sheep and things like that. Look at verse number 3. So it came time for them to bring of their increase to the Lord. Now, first of all, let me say this. How did they know to do that? How did Cain and Abel know to bring something to God? Watch what it happens. And in process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Okay, so Cain brought an offering to the Lord. He was a what? Cain was a farmer or a shepherd? He was a farmer. Cain was a farmer. He brought an offering to the Lord. Okay, next verse says this. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. So Cain brought some things to the Lord, and Abel brought some things to the Lord. I ask myself this, how did they know? Okay, how did they know they're supposed to bring things to the Lord? When did that get started? Okay, it's kind of like this. When God told Noah to build an ark and get all the animals on there, remember that story? He told him, how many animals was he supposed to bring on the ark? Of each species. How many? 2, 7, 8? I heard all kinds of numbers. 2 of clean animals. How many unclean? 7. Who told them what was clean and unclean? I thought that was law. That's law. See, when we think of law, we think of Moses. Moses on the mountain and God giving him the law, right? The law began with Moses. Well, how did Noah know what was clean and unclean? Maybe God had some rules even before the law and some concepts that they followed. That's what I'm trying to get you to think. So Cain and Abel brought things to God. The Bible calls Cain's bringing, it calls it an offering. Okay? Now I want you to notice this though. Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of the flock. So the first of his flock he brought to God. Okay? Now, is this why God had respect to Abel's offering and not to Cain's? It is an argument to be made that God had respect to Abel's offering or Abel's giving of the firstlings of his flock. Okay? Say firstlings of the flock 5 times fast, right? It is an argument to be made. Now, I think there's an equally, maybe even a more important argument to be made that Abel's offering was a blood sacrifice and Cain's was not. There's that argument. But I don't want us to miss this word here. Abel brought the firstlings of the flock. Cain brought an offering. Okay? Now, so what is this? This was when you bring the firstlings of the flock, everything in the Old Testament, when they brought the first fruits or the firstlings, it is in reference to the tithe, okay? It doesn't say that it was a tithe here, which is a tenth, but it says he brought the firstling or the first fruit of his flock, okay? So this is a reference to somebody bringing something to God and giving to God. And it calls it an offering in Cain's instance and a firstling in Abel's. Now I want to go to Genesis chapter number 14. Genesis chapter number 14. Anybody ever heard of Abraham? Nobody? Let me ask you this. Was Cain and Abel before the law was given to Moses or after the law? It was before, right? Was Abraham before the law or after the law? It was before. Abraham was the one that birthed Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, right? Okay?